Okay, welcome to the video for 8a through 8c. And I know it says B up there. I will change it on yours. We are in 8c now, or 8a through 8c. Okay, so let's look at 8a. I understand the difference between congruent and equal. So what is the difference between congruent and equal? So if the length of AB, segment AB, is equal to the length of segment CD, then AB is congruent to CD. So first, I'm going to show you what that would look like in a picture. If you have two lengths that are congruent, the way we would show that in a picture is we would have a little mark on it like that. Okay, if this one's congruent to that one, then they would each get one mark each. You could even put two marks. Two marks would show that they are congruent. That's how we know from the picture that those two shapes have the same size. What is the difference? Well, congruent has to do with shapes, whereas equal has to do with measurements or numbers. And when we're talking about a shape with letters, the notation for a shape would be AB, and I've already touched on this a little bit, but AB with a line over it means line segment AB, or segment AB. Over here, if we have AB without the line, and for some reason this is really confusing, or a lot of people miss it. If you ever see AB without a line, what that really is saying is measure of AB. So AB without the line, I'll put in parentheses, no line above, just so you can tell the difference quickly when you look at your notes. No line above means measure of AB. Okay, so we've talked about that congruent has to do with shapes and equal has to do with measurements or numbers. So let me show you how we would write a statement. So for instance, we would say, looking at this picture up here, we could say AB, segment AB, is congruent to segment CD. And this is the symbol for congruent. And look how it is an equal sign, but with this little squiggly up top. As opposed to the measure of AB is equal to the measure of CD. Because here we're saying, let's give this a measurement. Let's say that this is 7 centimeters. And since these are congruent, this one would also have to be 7 centimeters. So here we're saying these measurements are the same because 7 equals 7. We would never say segment AB is equal to CD because a segment is a shape, not a number, and equal has to do with numbers. Okay, how about with angles? So if we're talking about angles, if I want to name this angle, I'm going to draw an angle symbol in front of it, and then I'm going to name the letters, the 3 letters that are there, with P, the vertex, being the middle letter. So I could call this angle NPQ. I could also call this angle QPN, but I want to make sure that P is in the middle because that's how I know that that's the vertex of the angle. Okay, so this is how you name the figure, angle NPQ. This says angle NPQ. And if I want to say that these two are congruent, I would say angle NPQ is congruent to angle, and let's name this one correctly, try to do it right there, and then see what I write down, TSR. You could also have RST, as long as that S is in the middle. So TSR. Okay, also, if we're showing that these are congruent in a picture, the way we would show them that they're congruent is draw these little congruency marks on here. And all they are just little arcs that you draw right in between the angle. So you could have, if you had one on this one, then the other angle is congruent to is this one. And you'll see below maybe it'll make more sense once you see more angles together. You could also put 2, you could put 3, you could put as many little arcs on there as you need, but if this angle is congruent to that angle, they should have the same number of arcs. Okay, so when we talk about equal, now we want to talk about the measure of angle QPN. I'm just writing it differently just because. All right, measure of angle QPN. So what we're writing here is measure and in this case, we would use an equal sign. So we could say the measure of angle QPN is equal to the measure of angle TSR. Okay, so that's objective 8a. Let's look at 8b now. I will be able to identify congruent figures and corresponding parts by writing congruency statements. Let's take a look at this. What does it mean when two figures are congruent? Figures are congruent. They are exactly the same shape and the same size. And here's what are corresponding parts of figures. Okay, they are the parts from one figure that matches up with or corresponds with the other figures. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to label my two triangles over here, and I'm going to tell you that they are congruent triangles, and then we're going to find some. I'm going to show you which parts are congruent. So I'm going to call this triangle ABC and this triangle DEF. Okay, and then I'm going to tell you that angle A corresponds with angle D. So that means that they have to be congruent angles. So angle A is congruent to angle D. As well as angle B is congruent to angle E. And so notice that I put two congruency marks, even though that one's not very straight, on those two angles to show that this angle doesn't correspond with that angle, it corresponds with this angle. I'm also doing it in different colors, but you won't always see that. You will usually just see the congruency marks. So I have angle B is congruent to angle E, and then we also have angle C is going to correspond with which angle over here? Well, it corresponds with angle F. So I need to have the same amount of congruency marks there. So angle C is congruent to angle F. Not only that, we'd also have all these sets of sides that correspond. So I would have the side AB corresponds with DF, and I'm not going to write all those statements out right now. BC is going to correspond with EF. So I'm not just going to write 1, because if I do one little tick mark here, then that's saying that it's BC is congruent to AC and DF. When I really want to show you for this picture that BC is congruent to EF. So I'll put 2 on each, and then lastly, this side, I'll put 3 on this side, AB, to show you that it corresponds with DE by putting 3 on that side. Okay, so what is a congruency statement? This is just a statement that's showing that two figures are congruent, but the tricky thing about these is that you have to make sure that you write the angles in order. So let me show you what I mean. If I say that triangle, and this is how the notation for triangle, ACB is congruent to triangle. The first one you can just write however. It doesn't matter if you call it ACB, BCA, ABC. That doesn't matter. Just go ahead and write it down. But when you go to write the second one down, you have to pay attention to how you're lettering it and in what order. So since I started with A, I need to make sure in my congruency statement, in my congruent statement, that I start with the corresponding angle in the other figure. So A goes with D. That means I need to have D first. I'll put D, and then C goes with which letter in the other one? Well, it goes with F. And then lastly, B goes with E. And you can see that just by reading the congruency statement, I could draw the picture. I wouldn't even need the picture because I can see that which angles go together. And not only that, I can also see which segments happen in which order. So for instance, we have the segment AC goes with DF. And you can see that right there. These are the blue sides here. And then I would have CB is going with FE. So CB is going with FE, and you can see this on the purple sides here. Very colorful notes here. And then lastly, my BA, so I'm going from the very end all the way back to the beginning, the BA goes with ED. Okay, so this is a congruency statement, and you have to be very careful of the order. So we're going to stick with this for a little bit and try some examples. Okay, use the pictures to write a congruence statement if possible. So you have to make sure that you see that everything is congruent, okay? So here, when I look at this, my E corresponds with Q. They're congruent. They have 3 marks. My EI corresponds with QO. I see 3 marks there. I see 1 congruency mark there, 1 there, 2 there, and 2 there. It's a heck of a lot easier when they're in order like this, where it's just they've taken one triangle and slid it over and made another one, because you can clearly see, but we're going to get into some harder ones here. So we're going to go ahead and call this triangle, and like I said, you can choose whatever letter to start with. It doesn't matter. Go in whatever order for the first one. So let's just say GIE, just because, is congruent to, and now I have to make sure that if I started with G, what letter do I need to start with on this triangle? Well, you need to start with the one that's congruent with G, or that corresponds. So M, I need to put my triangle there, triangle M, and then I went to I, so I went G to I, that means I need to go M to O, and then I to E, so I need to go O to Q. Okay, just to prove a point here, this is correct. What would also be correct is if I said EIG is congruent to QOM. Okay, another way is if I said EGI QMO. So we're going to have different names. We might not have the same exact congruence statement as our neighbor, but we do want to make sure that each of the vertices, the angles, line up correctly. All right, so coming over here, is this possible? Are these congruent? Where I need to check to make sure that all the parts have a corresponding part. I see that this angle has a corresponding angle. I see that this angle has a corresponding angle. I see that these opposite sides are congruent. I see that this side is congruent to that side, and this side is congruent to that side. And then lastly, this angle in the middle, there aren't any congruence marks on here. However, these angles, when they cross like this, create congruent angles. Okay, always, when you see an X like this, these angles are congruent. These little bow tie angles here are called vertical angles, and they are congruent. So now I can write my congruent statement. So I'm going to start with the first one. It doesn't matter which one you start with, and it doesn't matter which order. So I'm going to go DEG is congruent to triangle. And now I need to be careful that I start with, that I start with the D that corresponds in the other triangle. Some people might look and go, okay, D goes with F, but that would be untrue because this one has 1 congruency mark and this one has 2 congruency marks. So D actually goes with H. So I'm going to go H, and then I go to E. I have my E here. It's also in the other triangle, H, E, F. Okay, coming over to this one, I see that all the angles inside this triangle are all the same size. They also are all the same in this triangle. And as it turns out, since we know that it's 180 degrees in a triangle, all these angles, if I divide by 3, each of them are going to be 60 degrees. So these are all 60. These are all 60. So I do have corresponding angles. However, these sides are, while they're the same to each other, they're different than they are in the other triangle. So this triangle not only are the sides different because of the congruency marks? We can also just look at this drawing that they actually made it a little bit bigger. You can't depend on that. It's not going to be shown just in size for you to measure. But because the sides don't have the same congruency mark, these are not congruent. So we'll just write not congruent. All right, this last one I'm going to leave for you. Okay, you do not need a triangle in front of it because it's not a triangle. You just need to go ahead and write the 4 letters in whatever order, if it's possible, that they're congruent, and just make sure you match them up correctly. Okay, on to the last objective in these notes. I'm going to flip back to the front to read it to you. But I will be able to find missing values by using the property of congruent figures and their corresponding parts. Okay, so there's nothing really note-like to do with these. We just need to go ahead and do the problems. Okay. For each diagram and given information, list all corresponding angles and sides that are congruent. Then find the variables where appropriate. And I'll fix this in your notes, but I'm noticing now that I did not have a congruency statement. Since there aren't any congruency marks on here, I would need a congruence statement telling me that these are congruent so I could find out these variables here. So I'm going to put it in here, but it'll be on your own notes when you get them. Okay, notice there aren't any triangles in front of here. That's because these shapes are not triangles. So we don't just randomly put triangles in. The reason we put triangles in for triangles is because we want to know the difference, and you don't need to write this down, but I just wanted to bring this up. We want to know the difference between an angle DEF and a triangle DEF. That's why the notation is different for those. But something like this, you have to be talking about a polygon with that many points. Okay, what's nice about this one is I happen to put it in order. So A, B, C, D, E is congruent with F, G, H, I, J. That's going to help when we're looking at this. But all we need to do to figure out the variable is A corresponds with what letter in the congruency statement? Well, it corresponds with F. Therefore, A is congruent to F. It's not congruent to just the nearest angle. You have to actually look at the congruence statement to figure out what's congruent to what. So that means that W equals 92. A couple things to notice here. One, I use an equal sign because I'm talking about a measurement. Two, you don't really have to put the degrees on it because we're saying W is equal to 92. They already have the degrees in there, but that's not something that I would mark you off for. I just wanted to point that out. All right, so W equals 92. What else are we looking for here? We are looking for X right here. So we need to find, and I'm going to change my color up here. We need to find the side that corresponds, yikes, with X. So X is from F to G. So when I look at my congruence statement, F to G is the first 2 letters. So in the other shape, I need to find AB. So FG goes with AB right there. So X equals 5. And then we still have Y to find. And Y is the segment JI. So I find my JI in this one. That means I need to find the 2 last letters in this one. So it goes with DE. Okay, you're always going to want to look at the congruent statement to make sure you're finding the right side there. We know that Y equals 6. And then the last thing we're looking for here, we still haven't found Z, so I'm going to go back and find Z. But Z is the angle J, so I need to find out, well, J is the last letter here in my congruent statement. It goes with the last letter in this congruent statement. So I'm going to look for, in this drawing, or this figure, E is 91. So Z equals 91. Okay, I'm going to show you one more, and then I'm going to have you try it on your own. Now, if we have 2 triangles where we have this is congruent to that, and this is congruent to that, and now we're looking for F here. And in this case, we didn't need a congruency statement because if you remember that a triangle is 180, and then I subtract 30, and I also subtract, 110, I get the angle measure 40 degrees. Okay, so that makes this one 40 degrees. Okay, if these two angles are congruent in this triangle, then this last one has to be congruent, because if this is over here, since it's saying that it's congruent to this angle must also be 110. And D is showing one congruency mark, so it's congruent to that angle, so it also must be 30. So I can do the math again, but 180 minus 30 minus 110 is still going to be 40 degrees no matter how many times I do it, as long as I do it correctly. So because of that, since I found it in this triangle, it's going to be the same thing in this triangle. So x equals 40. Okay, coming over here, I'm going to leave this last one for you. Yes, there's only one set of congruency marks. I will give you one hint before I go. We do have another set of angles that we know are congruent, and that's these vertical angles here. The ones that make the bow tie are always going to be congruent to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in congruency marks there and there. And now you use what I just did over here to find this x. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching, and make sure you write down any questions that you have.